We continue to cover our top story and breaking news this afternoon. This is Paula Eben here in the CBS News Boston studio with meteorologist Eric Fisher. What you're looking at is Colburn and Pleasant Streets in Leominster, and you see this massive sinkhole. This is only one that has opened up. As SkyEye is overhead, you can see the exposed pipes underground. That roadway just completely buckling with the amount of water that fell during the storms last night. And Eric, let me bring you in here since your coverage last night into the wee hours of this morning. I mean, this was just a massive amount of rainfall in a very short period of time.
It's just too much rain for any one spot to handle in a short amount of time here. It started around 4 in the afternoon, went till about 9 in the evening, and got about 9.5 inches of rain during that time. I mean, that's 3 months worth of rain almost coming down in a few hours.
But you were pointing out the ground was already soaking wet.
Yeah, nothing happens in a vacuum, right? I mean, you get 9 inches of rain, you're going to have flooding, but it's different when you've had storms the 3 days in a row previous. You're coming off the second wettest summer on record. In fact, some of these spots had their #1 wettest summer on record. So you have a high water table. You have a ground that's saturated. There's really not a lot of room for this water to just drain away somewhere or soak into the ground. And so it rushed all over the place, and we had an absolute mess. And the flash flood emergency the National Weather Service issued here last night, that was the first one since 2020 during a big flood which wiped out the Norwood Hospital. If you remember that flood and the huge damage that they saw there. So when they issue those flash flood emergencies, that's the top of the scale, the worst flooding you can see.
Yeah, people had to be evacuated. It was a really dangerous situation. No doubt, it just seems so unfair. You know, there are people just in the town of Leominster thinking, why me? Why us? What is it about the elevations in Leominster that might lend itself to this?
You know, a lot of these pictures that you see with the rivers coming through town, and you also see the undermining of some of these houses and some of the roads, very reminiscent of the flooding we see in Vermont, which we also saw earlier this year in July when they had a similar rain event there. You do have some pretty complex terrain around Leominster and in this part of the state where you have some valleys intermingled with higher elevations. So when it rains very heavily, you get more velocity in that water. It's not a flat area that just kind of fills up and the water stands. It gets moving, and when it starts moving fast, that's where you see this destructive force coming through and taking out cars, roadways, a lot of the infrastructure. At one point, they're worried about buildings collapsing last night because water was undermining those buildings. So whenever you introduce terrain and a lot of rainfall, it's very different than, say, 9 inches of rain in Florida with a sandy soil. We see a much higher impact with that kind of event here.
Wow, I mean, look at this. What does this say to you? You know, when you just look at a massive sinkhole like this, and then as SkyEye pulled back, we could see the entire corner of the foundation of the house next to this roadway washed away. I mean, this kind of damage is just really catastrophic.
It's so costly. It will take a long time to completely fix a lot of this damage. And, you know, I was talking to one person online who lives in this part of the state last night, and he was mentioning how Leominster has had a pretty big program of infrastructure and paving and redoing a lot of the roads over the last year or two. So they've just spent a lot of money fixing everything and really getting it up to, you know, brand new standards, and then this happens. And that's got to be so frustrating for the people in town who've been working hard trying to get these roads in shape, and now we've got a long road ahead to repair all the damage.
And on top of that, there's a dam nearby, and it reportedly was in desperate need of repair to begin with before this. And now residents are really worried about that dam giving way.
Yeah, I think it's been a topic of conversation for years there in Leominster, the condition of that dam, and it needs work, and it's seen some intermittent work. But, you know, we see that as much work as we put in and how we try to control our environments, build our roads, build our dams, nature is incredibly powerful. And all it takes is one flexing of that power of nature to really show that our efforts are kind of futile. And boy, after a night like last night, so much work to be done, and the water just ran ramshot across the area. I mean, we saw some pictures of Route 2 last night. This wasn't just, you know, a wet intersection or an underpass flooded. Route 2, main artery in this part of the state, was completely flooded out. I mean, water to the tops of cars. So a lot of people were on the road in the evening getting caught in this really scary situation.
Wow. And now we have more rain on the way tomorrow.
We do. Now, tomorrow's front could bring some more downpours and some thunderstorms, some locally heavy rain. We've got a flood watch out again for tomorrow. Same idea. Everything's already very saturated. Tomorrow's front should move a little faster, but again, you know, we've had so much humidity and so much moisture. We're going on a week plus where these dew points have been in the upper 60s to low 70s straight without interruption. That is very un-September-like. And so whenever it rains, it absolutely pours. And so tomorrow we'll be watching again for these downpours. Hopefully, you can't always say 3 towns are going to get 7 inches of rain today. Here are the 3 towns. You have a chance of those downpours, and then it's a little bit luck of the draw who gets them. And unfortunately, it was around here, Lunenburg, over toward Groton. These are the towns that saw some of the biggest rainfall totals. While in Boston, a couple tenths of an inch of rain, no big deal, different story. Wednesday will be similar. Some areas will get pounded with heavier rain totals. Others will be on the lighter side.
Look at that rushing water. And, you talk about how costly this is. Governor Healy has been touring through Leominster, all these towns earlier today. She gave a news conference just about a half an hour ago with the mayor and other local officials. And she said she has declared a state of emergency so she can get as many resources as possible to this area. As you say, it's going to take a very long time to fix the infrastructure here, the roadways. She's going to have to ask for some federal assistance, and hopefully that money can be brought to bear to help, pick these people up and fix these situations that obviously local budgets are just not going to be able to handle.
No, definitely not. And it's been a rough year. I'll tell you, from what we saw back in February, we're humming along in this really warm winter, and we get one incredibly cold day, and pipes are bursting all over the place, and you've got water damage and all the costs that came with that. And then we had a warm spring going, and then we had a late freeze. And a lot of farms, they applied for federal money and aid because they lost a lot of crops during that freeze. And then we entered this summer, and we've had several big flooding events. Now that's racking up a big bill, and what we don't need to see is Lee coming up the coast here later on this week. Hopefully that stays just to the east because we cannot take more rain.
What's the latest track and intelligence on Lee so far this afternoon?
I haven't seen a lot of big changes compared to yesterday. We've got a track that's offshore, but it's a question of how far offshore. It'll be a big storm when it passes us late Friday into Saturday. And so if it's a little bit closer, you start seeing some winds over 40 miles per hour. Another part of the story, because it's been so wet, is that trees are just going to flop over if you have strong winds. And that's a risk we're going to carry through the fall.
So we might have a lot of power outages
if
it comes close enough.
Right now it doesn't look close enough, but if it wobbles any farther west, then we'll be in trouble. So we're still casting a wary eye in Lee's direction. At the moment, I think it's going to be more of a coastal issue when it comes to big wave surf erosion there. But for these inland areas, right now, it does not look like a wet and windy storm system. We hope that stays the course over the next couple days.
All right, WBZ Chief Meteorologist Eric Fisher, thank you for your expertise, your coverage last night. And we know we've got to let you go because you have so much to gather before the news coming up at 5 o'clock. But we did want to talk about, we just wanted to give you, as you're watching here, an idea of what people in Leominster are dealing with. So that was a massive sinkhole in front of a home. You could see the rushing water. We're panning over. There was another Cadillac dealership in town where we've been today. Cars just sinking right into this massive sinkhole that were sitting on the parking lot of the car dealership. And now this is the dam in question that we're going to it. This is another body nearby, but we're going to look at this dam where residents downstream of that are really worried that if it gets compromised, that's going to cause really big problems. And yeah, as local officials look at this, Eric, they just see dollar signs and headaches. And for all these individual people calling insurance agents today, what a nightmare.
It really is. And, whenever I give a talk about, climate change, what's your biggest concern as a meteorologist who watches some of these changes? And I always say it's water. It's water from increasing heavy precipitation events that our infrastructure cannot handle. And it's water in terms of sea level rise and how that might affect our coastlines. I think water is the story, and we've definitely seen that a number of times the last few years. If you look across the country, the Northeast has the biggest increase in these heavy rainfall events of any other region. And so we've seen that we really can't keep up with this amount of rainfall in this short a time. It doesn't mean that we haven't had floods before or big rain events, but they have become more frequent. We've definitely seen an increase in these types of rainfall events. We have one system where they kind of look through a database of rainfall rates in different parts of the country. Long story short, the return interval for something like this in Leominster is about 200 years. So you'd call it about a 200-year flood, which means it has a 1 in 200 chance of happening in any given year. So this is a pretty rare event to get 9 inches of rain over the course of less than 6 hours.
And we can see here engineers and workers looking at the situation here, and they're just trying to evaluate and see what they can do. Water will always find a way, right? I mean, there's no holding it back. We've seen it when there's flooding in the seaport in Boston. We see it in a situation like this, and you just get a feel for people. As rain continues to come, they're powerless to do anything about it.
Yeah, water will find all your weaknesses. There's no doubt about that. And it's one of the toughest things to deal with in a house, too. Anyone who's had water in their walls or their basements know that that can be a big, big headache. And, Leominster obviously center stage today because of what happened there. But a lot of towns have had water damage, a lot of basements filled with water. A lot of people in other towns are still dealing with some of these headaches, even if it hasn't been as dramatic as what we saw last night in this particular spot.
Right. So hopefully this rain on the way tomorrow with the storms that we're expecting, as you say, won't, unfortunately, just cause downpours in small, specific areas like this, what happened last night. But, I mean, it was really something to suddenly realize people in Leominster were trapped. They had to be evacuated. It became a really life and death situation.
Now, around 6 o'clock last night, I called the newsroom and said, we need to be on Leominster because we could see that rainfall and how it was training and just sitting over the same spot, not really moving. And another thing that's really stuck out to me this year, we've had all this rain without a tropical disturbance. I mean, none of these have been connected to the tropics at all. And we hope that we don't add Lee or any other system down the road here in the next couple of months on top of it. But to have this amount of rainfall with some towns over 30 inches since the start of June, usually, look at all the big years where you have rain like that over the course of the summer. They almost all have a landfalling hurricane or tropical storm, and we haven't even had that yet up to this point.
Yeah, no wind per se, right? You were saying the ground has just been so soaked. There they are up trying to look at this situation. Look how fast that water is flowing and how much, you can just tell looking at it that's more active than typical.
Yeah, imagine what it looked like last night as well when everything was really rushing on down. And we'll see some increases on the bigger rivers as well downstream, but it won't be significant in terms of flash flooding on those bigger rivers. It would take a little bit more of a widespread heavy rainfall event for that.
Wow. Do you think in some of these towns, we'll probably see sandbags start to appear, bulldozers trying to move earth? I mean, in terms of the local infrastructure, I guess there's only so much you can do to prepare for the next rainfall.
Yeah, unfortunately, we have places that are vulnerable. A lot of our towns are built along rivers and along ponds and along areas of water. And when you do that, 99% of the time, it's great. You love to be next to it. But the 1% of the time where you get an event like this or a summer like this, can be really dangerous. And there isn't a ton you can do except for, have your sump pumps, have your sandbags if you think that is a necessary step to take to protect your home. And just keeping a close eye on the weather, a close eye on the forecasts and the current conditions, because on Wednesday, tomorrow, we do expect there'll be some more downpours, and hopefully we don't repeat this, but any rainfall at this point is very much not needed.
Wow.